So let's get started with the bi-weekly community meeting. So
Yes.
Here are the follow-up topics. And not everything is up to date, but this is the notes from last time. So I'm not sure if this is what we're going to go through or change it. Sorry?
No, I just wanted to ask if you started recording, but I see that you have, so.
Yeah. We started recording maybe 10 minutes ago or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So should we add some more topics or should we just start going through this? Because Imba version 2 is not highlighted here or any of the benchmarking things.
You could add a topic, just Imba 2.0 status, so I can go through things there.
Okay, so can we start with that and then just go through all of the topics in there?
Yeah, but maybe we can start with the others because we can go quite quickly through them, I think. And
Okay.
Imba version 2 is probably the thing that we're gonna talk most about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can take the lead here with the follow-up topics because the first one, separate Imba loader to test single file components and keep Imba loader vanilla. The reason we talked about that the last time was that we, in the initial implementation of SFC, we actually used the compiler utils from Vue, which itself included post CSS and a bunch of other things. And we really want to keep the dependencies to a minimum in Imba. So the thought was that we don't want everyone who want to download Imba to also depend on post CSS selector rewriter and lots of other packages. But the point is now moot because I actually changed it and rewrote the SFC thing to not rely on Vue component compiler utils. So we are now relying on two very, very small libraries that we are including inline, like the raw source in the Imba project, which is stylist, I think, and CSS selector parser. Not stylist, but just stylist. So now we're doing all the rewriting of the scoped CSS selectors using these things. So Imba still has 0 dependencies, and we do support SFC in Imba directly. So we don't really need to separate the loader out of Imba just yet.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, and so that's that point. The next point, talk about getters and setters beta release. Not sure how much there is to talk about. We did ship, it's not even beta, I think. We shipped 1.1, no, 1.5, and then 1.5.1 5 minutes later. So it's already shipped, it's already working okay. It's not really that useful since when you're doing Imba code until you start writing things for Imba 2.0. Because you really don't want the native getters and setters usually now. But it's working and it looks okay. So
nice.
Next point, branch for removing colon accessor. That is basically Imba 2.0. So the branch is 2.0. That's the name of the branch. And I think we can just get back to that with the V2 status.
Okay, so the next thing, the next thing was just something that I added recently, and I just have to be upfront about it. I haven't tried making something for specifically mobile devices, via writing Imba code, but I've seen some people try to do that, and it seems like some things just don't work. Like, how do you do drag events and touch events properly on mobile devices when you're writing Imba code? Is that something we want to support, or have you thought about that before?
Yeah, I've done quite a few things that has required drag and drop support on mobile, but that has been, so I think now most mobile operating systems are actually supporting native HTML5 drag and drop. I'm not sure. Do any of you know about that?
I don't know. I've only used the drag and drop on desktop.
Yeah.
Yeah, only layer 2.
but that even that API isn't really useful for games or special applications where you only just need in-application smooth drag behavior. So pointing the finger on an element and dragging it somewhere. But to do that, I would use the onTouch start, onTouch update, and onTouch end API that we have in Imba already. But I saw someone wrote in the chat some confusion where we actually use onTouch move in the documentation. And onTouch move specifically only works in desktop browsers, but you should instead use onTouch update, which works in desktop and mobile things. So I don't think we need any specific APIs for mobile. We already do that with the touch handler concept that kind of merges touch and pointer.
Yeah, okay. So if we just update the documentation, we can provide better examples.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I had just one follow-up thing to the CSS components or SFC. Like one thing that I found, just to jump back to that, is like when you write it right now, the lines get really long. It's not a big issue, but like when you're building with Webpack, you get these super long lines. Is there any way to turn that off?
I think, if you build with, are you talking about in the CSS, the SFC thing? Yeah, actually, that's pretty, I tried to look into that and I couldn't find a way to make stylus output with line breaks. And to introduce line breaks, you need to at least be somewhat smart about parsing and adding the line breaks, but it's probably an easy fix. It doesn't have anything to do with Webpack, I think. It has to do with stylus. It's not, the output isn't really verbose, but it's just, it removes new lines. And I didn't find a good way to turn that off or to,
Yeah, but like, do we need to see the output at all?
You're talking about the output in the console, in the Webpack console.
That's what I'm talking about, because that's like normally you'd just have those okay looking Webpack lines, but now you have this big concatenated style that shows up in the middle of the screen somewhere.
It's a very hacky way to bring the content of the CSS block into this virtual file that the Webpack will require. I've thought about some other ways to do that. Vue doesn't need that, but the way Vue does it ends up with Vue compiling the files containing the CSS blocks. It compiles these files one time for each CSS block. So if you have 3 CSS blocks there, it will actually compile the whole Vue file 4 times. So we tried to just work around that because we didn't want to do that. Then we instead included it in encoded parameter in the require itself, and it's very ugly. So there are some ways around that. I don't think it's of the highest priority yet, but we can at least have a goal of removing that in V2.
And also another thing I wanted to mention about the single file components. I think if you write a comment inside of the comment again, you like a regular CSS comment, it's gonna result in a compile error. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
I saw you mention that. That's definitely a bug.
Yeah, and I also have another case, because what I tried to do after the version was shipped was go back to some Imba projects and then start rewriting stuff or moving stuff over basically from the CSS files. I found one case where I couldn't, and I don't really know why, I couldn't get the code to work. It's stuck in a compile error. So I was thinking maybe we could follow up on that later, or I could try to isolate it and register a separate issue.
Where you had some sort of a selector rule with important or something?
Let me check. I can't remember right now.
It could be related to the hacky way we...
Yeah, that's possible, because I think I'm already using some previous style in there that might have important in, So that's possible.
Yeah, I just it probably has to do with the way we try to escape the content and include it in the require that we generate in Webpack, all that stuff. But we need to fix that, obviously.
Okay, so I can follow up and create separate issues for those.
Yeah.
And then there's the Sido selector thing. If I remember correctly, when you use those types of selectors, you can also end up in a compile error.
Okay, yeah, that's, have you filed a bug for that as well?
I think so, but I'll double check that.
Yeah, maybe we could take a few sessions where I go through the code with you, and then maybe you can be assigned to these issues and try to fix them for the next release.
Yeah, that would be cool to actually do some changes on the Imba code base. Yeah, so that's basically what I had to like comments on the single file components thing.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Next topic.
So the next topic is probably Imba v2, I guess.
Mm.
There is a branch now, public, 2.0. It's very experimental, obviously, and it's pretty weird to work with because it has renamed the package to Imba 2 and done a few different things just to be able to test Imba and Imba 2 at the same time. And the compiler itself is still written with the old Imba concepts. So the compiler actually needs to be compiled with the old Imba, while the runtime needs to be compiled with the new Imba. So it's kind of a mess there. The main changes, there are some more changes than we initially decided. So first I implemented getters and setters, and we shipped that as part of Imba 1.5. Then I tried to basically remove the implicit calling, like implicit parentheses. And after doing that, I started to experience Ivar accessors that we have now, like in Ruby, become kind of weird when you now can define properties just like you do in JavaScript. It's very weird that the @syntax exists as well, and that compiles to an underscore version of the same property. This is kind of difficult to explain.
Do you want to take over the screen and show us some code examples? I'm not sure I followed.
Yeah, maybe I can do that.
So do I stop sharing? Let me stop there.
And I need to just create a screen broadcast here. New. I will start sharing now. Just wait. See, Zoom, share desktop one.
Nice, see your screen.
Now?
Okay, I can see it.
Perfect. So this is the old example from Imba. Now we don't have the colon syntax anymore, so you can just use dot to access properties like in JavaScript, and just use dot to assign to them. So previously, when you did data completed yes, it would compile to data set completed yes or true. This isn't the case anymore. Now it's just compiling to data completed true, right? So we also had instance variables. So if I write completed here, or just as a getter, this compiled to this underscore completed, and this underscore completed true. And the reason it used underscores, that could be anything. It could have been like something like this instead. It's basically to represent that these are supposed to be hidden from external scripts and external actors, basically. So like in Ruby, instance variables are internal to the instance the instance. So if I wanted to be able to access the value of this instance variable from outside, I had to create a method that actually returns the value. And there you can see the reason we underscored it at all, because you couldn't create a method with the name completed and then return the value completed, like def completed return self dot completed, or in this case this from before. That wouldn't work because this is a method with the name completed and there's a property with the name completed, and that would collide. Magnus, maybe can you explain this better? It seems kind of confusing, and I know that you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's. I have a better way of explaining it, or but now that it's going away, it's also kind of moot explaining it more, isn't it?
That's true. So maybe we don't even need to explain it. At least it's going away. So right now in the Imba 2 branch, is working more like it does in CoffeeScript. We could even talk about this without even mentioning but right now it's working just like whenever you see an it's just like adding self dot in front. So it is nicer when you have a lot of functions that include a lot of properties and methods from the self object. Then it's much less verbose than writing self dot everywhere. But now it's much easier to explain, because you don't need to think about instance variables as something special. You can just not explain it at all for now, or you can say that it's just a shorthand for self dot. Okay? Are you with me, Alexander? Or?
Yeah, sorry, I muted my mic. Yeah, that makes sense. It seems easier to explain that way. But you mentioned you had some issues with Ivers. I didn't get that part.
Issues?
Yeah.
So the thing was that I started to see that when we remove this, when we change to regular access and assign, like in JavaScript with dot, it just started to seem weird that completed, these two were different. Because if you set completed this way and self-completed some other way, then these are two different properties, basically. That was what was confusing.
But that's resolved now on your branch.
That's resolved in the sense that is basically just now an alias for completed.
Yeah.
Okay. For self dot.
Okay, and then I get it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and to follow up on, to move kind of closer to ES6, we still have the functionality that instance variables supplied is now implemented still, but using the hash syntax instead, which is the syntax ES6 will use for private variables, because that is also easier to explain. If I do completed or did setup here, this is basically a variable that no one outside of this class should ever have access to. But inside of it, you can read it, and it looks weird now with the syntax highlighting because it was previously used for something else. But this might change. But again, it is now the instance variable like concept is now preserved with this hash syntax. Okay.
Yeah, I think I got that. But so this is within the scope of this tag, right? So it won't be exposed at all outside.
No, but you can expose it yourself. Did setup, return. You can expose it through methods and even through getters like get is ready. Did setup. This is just meta code to illustrate, but yeah. So at least for me, it will require a few more changes and improvements, but it is much easier to explain. Now it becomes confusing because I'm trying to explain it to, like, compare it to Imba version 1 and what's changed and why it changed, etc. But the main documentation for Imba 2.0 will actually be quite a lot easier to get people to understand, I think. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's definitely good.
So other than that, there aren't really that many changes syntax-wise needed. Still, we are going to fix the make import and export act more like ES6. But other than that, and maybe including the object destructuring and niceties from ES6, I think Imba 2.0 should be ready, at least as a beta, pretty soon. It will require you to rewrite a lot of your projects, but happily, most people haven't written a lot of projects in Imba just yet. But I think it's going to be a lot better. And
I think so too. And it's actually good that we haven't started rewriting large chunks of the documentation yet.
Yeah,
so we can actually do it at this time when the language has changed.
Yeah, I agree. And that being said, I've run into a lot of challenges on under the hood, especially when it comes to moving to ES6. I started to experiment with moving to ES6 classes, like compiling to the class syntax of ES6. But I ran into a lot of problems pretty quickly. And there are a ton of restrictions in ES6 classes that I'm not sure we want to support or we want to accept. So there is essentially no way for us to have executable class bodies if we want to compile to ES6 classes. And an executable class body, it basically means that you can run code here inside of the class. And the huge benefit of that is that you can add, if I do a class, my model, I can define self, register, name, options, blah, 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 do something here. And then you could inherit from my model. And in the class body, you could use these you can actually execute functions. Again, this is inspired by Ruby, where everything is essentially executable, all the concepts like classes and modules. And it is very powerful. And I found myself using it a lot in the projects we have, especially for adding kind of annotations and metadata to classes and structures. So removing it altogether feels kind of, yeah, I'm kind of skeptical to that, especially since the classes we compile down to work just as fine as ES6 classes, and they are just as fast, and there aren't that many benefits to strictly moving over to ES6 classes. Do you have any thoughts on that, Magnus?
No, I'm just trying to figure out if there was a way around this. I'm guessing you've tried to like hoist out all of the stuff that's happening inside the class, but then I guess there's some scoping issues with variables. And, stuff.
I think you could solve most of the scoping issues, but the problem is that you can never reopen a class in ES6. The only way to reopen it is basically reverting back to the old prototype manipulation. And so if you do things in between defining a method, then it is important, like especially if you have like field something, which is a class level method that creates a method or a getter and a setter, and then you later do something to override the getter, let's say. Then it's difficult to do that in the correct order, and this method will not. So I thought a simple, or the first step could be to just, in a class body, compile it to a native ES6 class all the way until it meets something that's not possible to do without evaluating the class, and then reverting for the rest of the class body, reverting back to the old prototype changes. But then again, that's messy as well.
But if you don't compile to ES6 classes, are they still compatible with ES6 extend syntax? Like if you declare a class in Imba and export it, it still works with extends?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we could even use the ES6 syntax just for the constructor to be able to get rid of imba.subclass utility and a few things like that. So that's another option.
Yeah, that was my other alternative, just to generate the first class car extends my model, and then from there on, its def method is just registering on the prototype.
Yeah, yeah. But so there are other changes and problems as well, and that's with getters and setters. If I do get Magnus, 1, set Magnus, value, something, yeah, I'm just going to return. The problem here is that this works fine in a ES6 class body. If you just add a getter and a setter, but if we need to like chunk it up and do it the old way, adding a method, adding a getter, adding a setter, it's not really, we want to always add the getter and the setter at the same time. The way you do it in JavaScript is object define property, car prototype in this instance, Magnus, and then inside of this object do like set and get and include both these methods at the same time. But in the Imba class, these can be defined in totally separate places in the class, and you can even override the first getter somewhere else. So I'm just having a hard time right now correctly managing to mapping these together and defining them in a single thing.
But can't you use get own property descriptor and access the previous getter and setter, and then
you can't update the previous get own property descriptor. You can't update the setter.
But isn't there a way to get the current one, and then you can sort of like update it yourself by merging in the previous setter?
Yeah, but the only way you can merge it is by actually like defining the property again, but with a merged object.
Yeah.
And you can do that. So this works now, but one of the reasons I'm mentioning it is that this is a WebKit specific thing. But if you define a property 2 times on a WebKit class or on a prototype in WebKit, performance for everything dealing with that object goes to the shitters. So when I was benchmarking things now, just defining a data property on the tag class reduced the performance by 70% or something. So it's but that's, you could look at that just as a bug and that they need to fix that. But that was one of the reasons I really tried to find a better way to group them and do all that. Because initially in the way Imba does it now, if it just compiles to this, then you will get this performance penalty in WebKit specifically. Not in Chrome and not in Firefox though, so might not be that big of an issue. But
yeah, interesting.
Yes. What else? I had, let me see, I had tons of different, other problems. You can't define async getters and setters. That's not a huge problem. I understand why you can't, but in Imba, we add the async flag automatically if you do await somewhere in the method. And ES6 doesn't have a syntax for like async get property. So in that case, it will need to be compiled by just wrapping it in another async function and returning that. So it's just a weird thing. Yeah, we lose executable class body. It also makes it difficult to runtime define things like if web with these kinds of flags, but then you can again ask whether that should be allowed at all, because it makes it more difficult to strictly know the signature of the class and so on. Also, if we want to support decorators before they are natively supported, like being able to do the decorator syntax, then we will still need to compile the items separately without being inside of one clean ES6 class. Yeah. So that was that part. When it comes to performance, it is actually, I'm already on 2.1, as you can see.
Nice.
But I've actually, the performance, I've experimented with a few changes in how we compile the tag bodies and rendering, which results in pretty huge performance increases. Especially when nothing happens. And the whole concept here is that we inline in the render function tries to see if properties are changed even before we run the actual setters. We should probably come back to that in another cast, but it's, yeah, Imba will become even faster, and that's a good thing, I think. So it's even much faster when nothing changes, which again, I'm one of my main, what do you say? One of the main points I always try to press when I talk about benchmarking. When nothing has changed, which is most of the time, then the new way of doing the rendering is more than twice as fast as the previous one. So now we are closing in on just, it's just the DOM methods that ever take any time at all. So I even been experimenting now with if you run the, if you render this 10,000 times or 100,000 times or whatever, the only garbage it will now create is, let's see, is this the right one? I can maybe try it here. If I run it again, the only garbage that will be created now is system garbage. No, this is an old, this was not the fastest version. Ah. If I now run this and then do a heap snapshot, and then I do a run again, another heap snapshot, and then you will see that the only garbage that is ever created during these renderings now is system stuff, like a system string and a number and things like that. So that will be even better for performance, and garbage collection will take even less time of benchmarks. Or not even of benchmarks, obviously, but of real world applications.
Nice.
Yes. But it's still very experimental. I'm going to continue work on this in the coming weeks. I need to do a lot of other things as well, not related to the core of Imba, but I will try to get some time in, and the goal is definitely to launch Imba 2.0 before January 2020. So.
Nice, but I have some follow-up. So I was wondering, like with the benchmarking now, the performance improvements, are those directly related to ES6 changes, or I'm not sure I understood that part.
No, they're not related to ES6 changes at all. They're basically related to and more like detailed way to just an even more verbose way to compile the render trees, the functions, and some other minor optimizations, but none of them are related to ES6. So they can be backported into Imba 1.5 when they're ready, I think.
Okay. And the other thing I was wondering about, that's the project Magnus is doing. I was curious about Patchy, if that's something that could be used here.
Well, Patchy is still just an ID in the Ruby world, so I'm not sure how I'm going to bring it into any sort of language yet.
But maybe in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I have like a lot of ideas on my to-do list.
Yeah.
So No, I haven't had time to look any more into it, unfortunately.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I was thinking it would have been cool if you could just rerun it. Like, here's my convention. You just write, okay, this is how I want everything to be set up. Or if you could define Imba 2.0 and then just run it on a Imba 1.5 code base, and it would make all the changes. That would be amazing.
If we actually managed to do that, then I don't think Imba would be of any interest to him whatsoever. Then he would be able to take over the world. Because it will need, there are essentially like, logically, there are no way to compile, to convert Imba 1.1 code over to Imba 2 code. Unless you can just keep clumsy, rewritten, weird code that doesn't chime with the new idioms in Imba 2.0. So.
I see. Yeah, so it's very hard. Very hard.
That's true. Okay. I'm not sure. I guess there will be a lot more updates in the next 2 weeks. I haven't been working on this branch for more than a couple of days, but it's gone a lot quicker than I thought, and it's very fun to work on. So I think we'll have a lot more updates in 2 weeks.
I think it's amazing. I was really surprised when the SFC stuff was ready. I was expecting this to be ready in a couple of months. So it's really cool that we can actually try out this new stuff and then see it in action. And also the response. Not many people have reached out, but the response I observed is that people are very positive about the changes.
Yeah.
So
cool.
I think it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'm looking very much forward to being able to write some sensible documentation. Not me, but someone else, you, writing sensible documentation for 2.0, because it will be easier for people to grasp. And it will actually be, unless everything you deal with is Imba objects and Imba code, then it will be much prettier than Imba 1 as well, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, just getting rid of the colon stuff is going to make things beautiful.
Yes, of course. You can remove all the colon stuff, and then in Exchange you will need to add a few parentheses here and there to explicitly show that you are actually calling the function.
I don't think that's bad. It makes the code clearer.
Yeah.
Should we start wrapping up, or is there anything else? Maybe Magnus, do you have a topic you want to talk about?
No, I don't have any particularly interesting to say.
Cool. Did you see the SFC stuff, Magnus?
No, I didn't see the. No. It's
basically inspired by the way Vue does it. So it's not using the CSS components where you generate unique class names and you need to import them all and all that. It's essentially doing the same thing as Vue, where we add a unique identifier or a class on all tags that are created within a file. So it's easy to add styled CSS classes and styled CSS stuff without needing to deal with the dynamic class names.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, I'm looking forward to using it a lot more myself. I see that it's useful.
Do you think we're going to have any syntax changes on it, or is it like considered? Are we going to have any syntax changes on the SFC part, or do you think it's stable and it's going to stay like that?
So the only syntax change would obviously be to how to define a CSS block or a style block, because that's not ideal now. We're basically just using multi-line comments with if they start with CSS this and that, then it's a CSS block. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any hurry to change it. It works okay. It even works here, I think, in Scrimba. If you do CSS scope, then everything inside of here will be scoped. Like, So if we were to change anything, it would be how we actually define these blocks.
Yeah, so just the comment part.
Yeah, just the comments. I'm not sure what the alternative would be even. Like, okay, that's slightly different, but yeah. We do need to push out a new VS Code plugin that supports highlighting of CSS blocks and getters and setters. So that should be on the agenda for next time.
Yeah, I'm writing it down now. And the Sublime plugin doesn't need it?
I think I've updated it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I've updated the Imba, the Scrimba plugin for Monaco. So.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a lot of documentation stuff done this week. So just clean up and like just structuring everything and coming with concrete proposals. So I'm not sure I'm going to push out everything, but I'll try to maybe send you some static links where everything is rendered, or pre-rendered, and just to propose a couple of directions. And now I actually have time.
If you want to start sharing your screen again, I stop share.
Yeah, okay. I don't really have that much I'm going to share. Let's see, is this... Can you see the notes? Yeah, so basically just come up with several... I have some ideas on what I wanted to do. I just haven't had time yet to... I have a couple of local branches with different changes. So I just need to clean it all up and then, just push it out on GitHub somewhere. And then we can just look at it and discuss on the content and the structure. But I'm currently looking at several other sites and using that as like inspiration for the setup.
Cool.
So, ska vi se. Are you going to do the VS Code plugin, or is that something Frode is going to do?
And maybe Frode can do it, or maybe you can do it as well.
Yeah, okay.
But Frode has set up the whole thing for fixing VS Code syntax and stuff, so could be a good challenge for him.
Yeah, I was thinking because he's already went through the changes, so maybe I can ask him. If he doesn't have time, then I can look into it. And you're going to continue on the V2 stuff?
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the Safari issue again next time?
Maybe. I'm probably just going to work around it. But I'm hoping to, maybe I could try to isolate and actually file a WebKit bug, because it's not supposed to be like that. It's very weird, and it is predictably happening here. So
yeah, maybe
if I isolate it in a benchmark example, then it would be something I should report to them.
Yeah. I was thinking if you can isolate it in a small reproducer, that probably makes it easier.
Yeah.
And another thing I was thinking about, since we tried the Imba changelog thing and that worked, I was trying to see if I could get Magnus to do some casts with me, since he's physically in Norway. So I thought, is that something you might be interested in? I was thinking I could propose a couple of topics, and if it's out of interest and you have time, then that would be great. If not, just let me know and I won't bug you.
Yeah, come up with some proposals and I'll have a look at it.
Cool. Yeah, so I think that's everything. Less than an hour, so.
Yeah. Perfect.
Cool, thanks.
We'll, talk later.
Yeah, talk later.
Yeah, bye.
Awesome.